you guys know who's up here. We have Dr. Steele, who received his PhD from New York University, and then we have Dr. Wolfram, who received his PhD from University of California, Berkeley, and then we have Dr. Clark, who received his PhD from George Mason University. So we're going to start off with Dr. Steele giving a quick presentation with the PowerPoint and everything, and then I'll have a few questions that'll cover most of the general stuff, and then afterwards we'll open it up to Q&A. So please join me in welcoming.
Great, thanks. Well, glad to see a big turnout here and people are interested in this sort of thing. I'm just going to go ahead and just launch into this without any real further ado. We're going to talk a little bit about what I want to talk about is why somebody might be interested in grad school, what some of the opportunities are, and things like this. And since we're in econ, one of the first things we should think about is, well, what happens if you get an economics degree? This is actually, all the numbers I give you, you have to take sort of with a grain of salt, because they're all kind of estimates and they change, and different sources will give different numbers, but roughly correct. This kind of points out where economics, this is a bachelor's in economics, and where you start out. That's kind of an average. I kind of think that those numbers are a little bit low, but especially for the history and the English ones seem to be pretty accurate. It might be a little bit low for economics. And in fact, Hillsdale students, I don't have any hard data on this, but a little bit I can tell, Hillsdale students do better than that when they graduate with a bachelor's. So I'm going to talk about how you do even better if you have a graduate degree. You also have an opportunity cost, which you take into account. So there I want to talk about who might be interested in economic grad school and why, how you prepare, what kinds of things might be of interest. Just kind of talk about that a little bit, just to give a really quick overview. So nothing happened about that. Oh, there we go. So what happens if you get a graduate degree in economics? Why would you want to think about that? Well, you actually, as it turns out, make more money on average with one, which is kind of probably a good thing. I think it is. So those are median starting salaries as calculated by the National Association of Business Economists for people who graduate or with degrees in economics. So again, bachelor's degree, right in the ballpark of $50,000. And you can see there's a premium on those. I think those are a little bit low now for the graduate degrees. Forbes every year lists what they think are the 10 most promising master's degrees for the future. Changes every year, but economics frequently comes up on that. For 2017 it didn't, but they had about something like 6 kinds of MBAs. They divided them up so much that it crowded the whole field, and they're all executive MBAs, and you can't get an executive MBA until you're an executive. So those weren't entry-level kinds of questions. But econ is a pretty strong, terminal master's degree can be a really good degree, is one of the points here. And of course, we'll talk about the difference between that and PhD a little bit too. And I've got stacks and stacks of data and sources and things like that, if anybody's really into that stuff. So, talking about the kinds of degrees you can get, just a little bit. In economics, in particular, well, you can think of the master's degree, and there's the Master of Arts, the Master of Science. Oftentimes there will be a little bit of difference in them, but not trying to depends on the school. These can be great terminal degrees. So a few years ago, I was talking to the people at Chicago Mercantile Exchange who hire economists, and they were talking about, because we had kind of a connection through one of our students with them. They were talking about the kind of people they hire and what they look for, and we were thinking about what we need to do to make our students prepared for that. And I asked them about master's degrees, and I said, we hire people with master's degrees to do market research and data analysis, things like that. And they're very excited about things like economics, also agricultural economics. So I'll say a bit about ag econ maybe as we go. And the other thing about a master's is that it's a good preparation for a PhD degree. It used to be that if you were thinking of getting a PhD, the advice was Okay, just go from your bachelor's straight to a PhD program. That's what most people do. And why waste time with a master's program? And fairly recently, it has been the case that more than half of the people going into, more than half of the foreign applicants going into US PhD programs are coming in with a master's degree. And since that's most of the people coming into the US, going into US PhD programs, they're kind of setting the standard, and it's likely that having a master's is kind of the way of the future. So it's not necessarily, but it might be a useful thing to think of if your goal is a PhD. Why would you want to get a PhD? Well, other than the fact that you want to be like these cool guys here. The PhD degree prepares you for, that wasn't a joke. They are cool. I get to work with them too. With, if we call it work, but research, consulting, and teaching. The PhD is a research degree. That's what you're trained to do primarily. And it is, you're learning about techniques for studying methods and tools and things, as well as your theory. And the PhD prepares you, of course, for academia. A little over 50% of the people who get PhDs in economics go into academia. It ranges between 50 and 60% per year, according to what I've read. Some people go into the private sector. Now, of course, people go back and forth. They go into NGOs, think tanks and things like this, and some of them go into government. So there are all kinds of opportunities like this things that people can do. So, I don't know. Actually, as I go, if you have questions, go ahead and try to interrupt me. Good luck with that. Just a few things about some of the places that our students have gone, or where we have students right now who have been through our econ program. And as you can see, we have trouble placing into schools that anybody's ever heard of. We already have students at places like Harvard University, Indiana University, Iowa State, that's a PhD program in Ag Econ. Barcelona Graduate School of Economics, which is an English language program, very highly ranked, a master's program. Boston, all these other places, George Mason, of course. When I call up, I a couple of times ask, every so often I ask George Mason, how many Hillsdale students are in grad school there? And they say, well, it'll take us a while to calculate the numbers, so call that. Because we get a lot of students who go there. LSE, we've got Jack Shannon is doing his PhD. That's a top school in England, or in the UK. Montana State University, a very strong master's program. We have 3 students there right now. And these other places. So very good placements. The ones that have asterisks, those are PhD programs that students are in or have completed where they got a master's first. So Kadeem Noure is at Harvard right now, and he got his master's at Montana State. So it's a stepping stone, master's to a highly ranked school.
Do you recall who the students that are at or went to University of Michigan at?
No, they went to, we had 2 guys who went to the Masters of Applied Economics. I don't know what they've done since then. But they were looking at it as a terminal degree, not to go to a PhD program. Yes?
Will you be talking about like the differences between taking an internship after you get your bachelor's and maybe trying to go directly for PhD?
Like what you do? I will say something about, I will say a lot about that.
Okay.
I didn't do any of that stuff. I will recommend that you do what I did, which was to become a competitive triathlete. At least it worked for me. I enjoyed it. But we'll talk about those things here in a second. So this is kind of the next point. Who should go? Because it really is not for everyone. We had Wendy Stock, who is one of the people who studies this stuff pretty carefully, an economist. They say that about 50% of the people that enter a PhD program actually complete it. When I was at New York University, 50% of the students who I went in with left without a PhD. And that's pretty standard, I think. some of the people got there and they said, is this what this is about? Or they said, this is too much work, or I'm tired, or I've got a good job opportunity, something like that. And they don't make it through. I mean, my own thinking is that how do you know you want to go to graduate school in economics? And kind of the way I think of it is it should be something that's burning inside of you to think, man, this is what I really want to do. I know that this is what I want to do. And if that's how you feel, you're ready for it. We had a student here when I was first teaching, this is in the first couple of years I was here, Micah Sepinen, who I think was probably had the high GPA of, I think he was the top econ student of that particular cohort. And he was all prepared to go to grad school and was talking about it. He came in, he had applied to schools. He came into my office one day and he said, Dr. Steele, I said, I'm sorry, I know you've written letters and all sorts of things. My heart's just not in this. The reason I applied because my family told me to, and I just don't want to do this. And I said, Micah, that's great news. I mean, if you don't want to go, don't go. You can go someday if you change your mind about it, but don't go. When I graduate, who can go? Well, hang on a second. I don't even know my slides out here. Yeah, how do you choose? Well, and I'm going to say something about being properly prepared. So I'm going to return to your question here in a second. Some of the things you want to think about are when you are looking at schools is, first of all, you want to think, what are my goals? What am I trying to accomplish? Am I looking at a PhD? Do I want to be in academia? Am I thinking I want to go in a think tank where I'm going to be doing policy because I want to fight the socialists or something like this? Whatever it is you're thinking of. You want to think about, first of all, the quality of the school. What are the rankings? And there are many different ranking systems or many different sets of rankings of schools. But quality matters. You tend to want to go to a good school. It can matter. What about the specialties? So what kinds of things do you want to study? If you wanted to study Austrian economics and really focus on that, we probably would not want to go to Rochester in New York or something, which is a very mathematical school, and that's, I think, about all it is. But you might want to consider George Mason, something like that. How well do places place their graduates? Where are people going once they've completed? If you're looking at a master's program, or you're thinking that it's a stepping stone to a PhD, do they do a good job of, where do their people go after they graduate? Schools that do a good job publicize that. You can find a list of these things. Do their people graduate? There are some PhD programs, I would say don't go to those. You won't apply to those. I wouldn't write you a letter for them. You probably never heard of them. But there are somewhere, if they do graduate, do they get jobs? No, probably not. Can you get in is another question. I mean, if you can get into the University of Chicago and you can get through it, you're in great shape. Very few people can get into the University of Chicago. And they're shooting really at the very top. And then another question is, are you properly prepared? So we can talk about preparation and things too. The minimum, what I consider the minimum preparation to go to grad school in economics is not a degree in economics. I did not have a bachelor's in economics. My bachelor's was in history. That didn't really, it was a great degree, but it didn't prepare me for this. And I had to take background courses when I finally decided it was time for me, when I finally decided that was what I wanted to do. And so the basics would be intermediate micro, intermediate macro, Calc 1 and 2, linear algebra, and a good stat and an econometrics background. That will have you prepared for your standard master's program. You could probably, you might be able to, depends on the PhD program, you would be ready for that, depends. But the more of that kind of stuff you can get, the better. Simply because these are tools you will use, they're weapons that will help you get through some of your more difficult courses and things like that. I guess that's good on that. Now, this is about applying applying to grad school. Okay, well, this is supposing you're thinking, I'll just run through my slide. Too much else to this. You decide you want to go to grad programs. What do you have to do? Well, first of all, you have to decide where you want to go. You look at schools, you search some of them out. You talk to all the people you can find who can give you advice on these sorts of things. All of the faculty members here are willing to talk to you about those things. And you might find people elsewhere, students who have been through graduate. We've got a great network. If you want to talk to Kadeem Norre at Harvard, or people at Montana State, or people at Mason, other places, we can find students and we can get their opinions in places. But at any rate, when you apply, you need, first of all, a statement of purpose. I spoke with the Director of Graduate Studies at the Ag Econ program, Ag Food Resource Economics program at Michigan State University. I asked him about this, and he said that statement of purpose is one of the things that we really look at, because we get a stack of applicants. And you know something? They're all really smart, they've got good test scores, good GRE scores, and these sorts of things. Well, why do we want to have this one instead of this one? Is there something cool about this person? Do they have sort of a passion for economics or something that makes them interesting? Another thing that's important is your letters of reference. And so I think some of the other guys are going to talk about reference letters, but you want to have good relations with professors and people who are going to be able to write you good letters and get them plenty of time and help them get that. You need a CV, a resume, GREs, transcripts, all that kind of stuff. Anything else, you got to hit the program deadline. So you have to research those things. Great. And then if you're not prepared, what do? You do just what I did. I was not prepared for grad school, so I went and talked to professors, and they said, here, take these courses with us, and this is what you'll need if you expect to go to grad school. As I say, I've been competing in triathlons and then working whatever jobs at the time. I think that was actually, in some respects, good preparation, because it taught me a work ethic and kind of the idea of, this situation at the present, my sock, this hurts or something like this, but who cares, because I've got a long run goal in it. I think that's one of the things that got people at NYU through the ones who finished through the grad program. At any rate, all kinds of things you can do, ways of tackling. You decide what you're trying to accomplish, where you are, and then what you need to do to get to where you're going. Okay? If you don't have the right background, figure out a way to get it. How do you pay for it? That's a stupid question. People should pay you to go to graduate school. That's the way I look at it. I was paid. And so you get teaching assistantships, research assistantships, even at the master's level in some programs. At Montana State, I actually socked away a little bit to get money doing this. I lived pretty cheaply. All kinds of stuff. The best thing you can do if you want more stuff is to ask us. We've got a zillion sources of things. And I'll simply say that it's not for everybody. It's very hard. But there are things about it that make it worthwhile. I know that it's just before I conclude, there are a couple of things about economics. I was talking a couple of years ago to an attorney who had just gone to her 20th, her law school's 20th, her law school's graduating class 20th anniversary. And she said that more than 50% of the people had given up law. And the main reason was because they didn't like it. I've never heard of anybody ever getting a graduate degree in economics and giving it up because they said they didn't like economics. I've just never heard of it. It's a very cool thing to do. Some of us are interested in it because we also know we're in a big intellectual battle, which is, I guess in some ways, for the future of the country. And this is one of the best fields you can go into to help fight that battle. It's fun. You get to meet cool people, believe it or not. All kinds of other stuff. But is it worthwhile? Is it really worth it? And the answer has to be no. Don't do it. Now wait a minute. Is that right? Here we go. There we go. All right. So Mises says yes, so it must be good. Okay, so, anyway, that's all I have to say.
All right, thanks, Dr. Steele. I'll go ahead and dive into the questions that I have. So this is just open up to the entire panel. So how and when did you decide that economics grad school was the right path for you?
I decided when I was a junior, because I was running cross country and track at UC Santa Barbara, and I thought, wow, this is a great lifestyle. How do you get to stay in college your whole life? And they said, oh, you have to go to college for another 4 or 5 years. And I said, sign me up. And that's how I got into it.
So my story kind of is a little bit, I guess bouncing off of what Dr. Steele said. There's kind of normal advice where they say, don't go get a PhD unless you absolutely know you want to get a PhD. Like, don't go to grad school to figure out if you wanted to go get a PhD. If you guys have had me, I always talk about like uncertainty and the unknown future and all this kind of stuff. That's like my personality, where I'm like, I don't know anything about the future and what's gonna happen. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I loved economics in college. I wasn't a very good student when I started off, and I found economics and I became a pretty good student.
He got the ninja sword.
So I became pretty good, right?
Those of you who've been awarded a ninja sword or competed for the ninja sword, yeah.
Yeah, I became a pretty good student once I found econ. Actually, I was a Hillsdale student just like you guys. I went off, at the time we sent like 1 or 2 students off to the Foundation for Economic Education each summer. They had advanced Austrian seminars back then, which is great. You know, they have one at Clemson that's like a morality and economics now that you can go to. But I went to that and got to just spend time with just econ for like 4 or 5 days. And I was like, this is way better than being in school. Like, actually getting to engage the ideas I want to engage in just those is great. And so I just really liked economics. I came back here, one of my faculty advisors said, hey, you should at least apply. And I was like, but I don't know what I want to do. And it's like, so pursue, right? At least apply for other jobs, whatever. Ended up getting in, and so I went for it, right? But one thing I would, I guess, bouncing off of this advice and this question is another piece of advice that I would give you is what everybody is going to tell you about grad school for the most part. I actually think like Dr. Steele does a very good job, Wolfram does a good job, I think we do a reasonable job of it here, is their story as though that is how it works. And so this is like shows up in some like empirical research on giving advice, but you just say your sample size of 1, and sample size of 1 is done, right? And so what you need to do is ask this question to a lot of people, right? You got to go and see, okay, well, how does it work in the real world? I went to a PhD program without funding my first year. I give the advice not to do that.
Well, but just historically, it didn't used to be that you got money to go to grad school.
PhD programs, I'm talking about 10 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
Well, when I went,
It's still the same deal.
You got-
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
you would get a TA or an RA position.
Yeah.
They could pay you, but to actually get, where they just give you money, that doesn't happen. Now, my daughter got her PhD, and she got all sorts of funding through IHS. So there's a lot of, and Intercollegiate Studies Institute. She was what's it called, Weaver Fellow or something like that. And so she got a bunch of funding to go. So, it just sort of.
I think at the time, you told me you probably don't want to go unless you get funding.
Well,
I think that's right.
I think that's good advice,
Yeah.
especially in today's day and age. I went in with the plan of, if I don't make it through, I'll take the master's, which not every program allows you to do, and you have to go through all of the hardest stuff. But I got funding my second year.
I was told when I was going in that I should get funding. I was in my PhD program probably well before you were. But that was the advice I got, was that, what, you're not gonna, unless you got to the very, I was told, unless you got into Chicago, which you'll never get into, it would be crazy to borrow money to go to school.
Chris, I mean, I do have to say that the full year's tuition was $600. So.
But part of that information is you have some idea of how well you'll get through, and they have some idea of how well you'll get through. They know some information, so if they throw money at you, it's more likely that you'll get through. If they don't give you money, they're saying, ooh, you're kind of a gamble. Right? And usually in programs, I think only a few people don't get funding now, for the most part. That's my understanding. Most people, if you're in, you get some. They'll sometimes tack on some other people, but.
On the other hand, you have to be careful that if it's going to cost you more to go to the University of Chicago than it does to Boise State, go to Chicago, right? You want to get into places that either are highly ranked or they have somebody that you're going to work with. So again, like I think it was mentioned earlier, if you were, let's say you wanted to in agricultural economics, you may want to get your PhD at Michigan State rather than Harvard because the top people in that field might be at Michigan State. So if you go in early on, like I didn't know what subsector I wanted to be in, but if you know, okay, I want to do this, then you may want to just look who's the top people in that field, and even if they may not be in in the top 5 universities, if you can work with them, then you may want to do that.
All right. Well, Dr. Clark, this is going to be specifically for you. How did you feel your Hillsdale College education prepared you for grad school, and what did it prepare you well for, and where might it have fallen short? And try not to say negative things like Dr. Wolf.
So, again, this is like sample size 1 thing here. I was not a good student. That's why if you're not a good student, I work with you and I try and turn you around. I've been there. I wasn't great. I had no idea what I was doing. I went to public school and I had no idea what I was doing in public school. I took 4 years of French and I didn't club out of French 1 year. Right? I wasn't a great student. I was figuring things out. So I wasn't on the grad track program like right from the get-go. I picked up on it real late. So he said, you should take the calc classes, linear algebra, differential equations, econometrics, math econ. I had none of that. I had 0 of that. Hillsdale thus did not prepare me for the mathematics because I didn't take it, right? I think it does a very good job of preparing you for the mathematics if you take it. So I was very behind in the mathematics going straight into a PhD program. However, you have a distinct comparative advantage on the economic way of thinking that people will appreciate no matter where they're at. Even if they're at like Rochester or highly mathematical school, they love to see that you can actually see what that math represents as opposed to just being able to do the math. And you will be able to find people who can do the math. And if you've learned anything from economics, you realize that exchange can be mutually beneficial. So my Hillsdale degree prepared me very well because of classes with Dr. Wolfram and others, where I understood the economic way of thinking. I knew what this stuff actually meant. And so when our students go even into top programs and stuff, I think our program does an excellent job of giving you that economic way of thinking. You have to dive into the math classes or take math econ or econometrics and those kind of things to solidify you for the rest of the stuff. But I think the program we have here does a very good job of that. You are not meant to already know grad school by the time that you get out of here. So some people are like, well, I wish we could have had like econometrics 3 before I left. Yeah, that's called grad school. So I would say, so the advice I've gotten from past students, this is from Jax Shannon and Kadeem, both backed this up with me. They offered the other classes that they would take would be linear algebra for econometrics training, Calc 3 for their micro stuff, and math econ if possible with Steele. That the Calc 3 is kind of like the math econ stuff to some extent, but a little different focus. Differential equations for your graduate macro stuff, And then if you can, Dr. Barnes sometimes teaches an advanced stats class after you've done econometrics. You could do that class in his, he's psych department. Those would be the other classes that you could take. Otherwise, the econ grad program, like if you're thinking grad school, there are certain things you need to do within the electives here. You do intermediate micro, you do intermediate macro, you're going to have to do that anyway, right? But you also should take econometrics and math econ. So 2 of your electives are already eaten up if you're considering it, right? And I got news for you, those aren't always like the more fun electives. But that's
Math
kind of
econ.
what you need. It's not, sorry, it's not. Who wants to take math econ versus Austrian 1, right? Or Austrian 2, even, right? Nobody does. But a couple of you, there's a few like math people in here like heresy, right? But for the most part, you know, I have no complaints. The students that I have talked to, I have said, what did I do wrong in intermediate micro by you? I beg them to be honest with me. And I've gotten some feedback, and guess what? Some of it's in your class already if you're in it right now. Steele has done the same thing where he says, oh, you know, how could we prepare you better? So we have a pretty good, you know, understanding because we've placed so many students. So I think the education here, you guys are in a good spot. If you guys go in at, like Elma College in Michigan is a very good school. It's a school I considered going to when I was in high school, whatever. It's in Michigan, it's about our size, it's a little bit bigger. You go and you ask them, how many people went to grad school from your program in economics this year? And they will laugh at you. I've done this. They will laugh at you and say, this year? We've sent 1 in the last 4 years. We sent 15 last year. It's crazy. So a lot of people are going through. You do have to go outside the econ department to shore up your math if you want to go in with that preparation. I'm saying that, not having done it, right? So even if you didn't do it and you're late, hey, you might be able to hop into a master's program and get that training, whatever, or maybe a few PhD programs will take you in, depends on what you're looking to go into. And maybe your GRE math score is high enough where they say, you'll figure it out, which is kind of like what they said with me. Like, eh. And I went and I didn't really figure it out on my own. I traded. Right? But that's what you do in your first year of grad school especially. You get in groups and you trade with people and all that stuff.
Actually, we have a very good relationship with the math department here.
Yeah.
I mean, a large number of their students are economic students, and they teach a lot of double majors. They teach the game theory class, which is cross-listed. You know, we interact with them a lot, so you know, they'll ask us when they're doing their, you know, sometimes when they're doing some of their math courses, they might call up and say, hey, you know, what applications in economics would you know, can you recommend? So yeah, they're a really good group of folks over there in the math department. So I would, yes, exactly. Linear algebra really helps you with econometrics, and there's a number of, yeah, Calc 3 really helps you. So there are some math courses. The game theory class you can use that as an economics elective as well. So it's nice to just, it doesn't hurt you. If you're going to get C's, you may not want to alert the grad school that you're not that good at it. But if you can get
probably
B's,
don't want to go to grad school then and get a PhD.
yeah, but if you can get B's, then take as much math as you feel comfortable with.
Great, great. So what was the application process like? More specifically, what difficulties did you have, and what advice do you have for students either going through the process or preparing to do so?
Well, I applied in 1972, okay? And I had absolutely no one advising me, and I applied to 3 schools, Harvard, MIT, and Berkeley. Nobody said, oh, you know what, maybe you don't get into one of those 3, right? You know, fortunately I did, but I couldn't really tell you. For me, it wasn't that hard. I only applied to 3 schools and sent it in, and they said, fine. But that was well before you guys were born, so, or even your parents were born, maybe.
My experience is not, is probably not relevant either. And I think standards and the way that the process goes now has changed. So I don't think it would be relevant. But I think that what a student ought to, what a person applying should do, it's pretty standard advice, but you pick a couple of stretch schools, like these are the best places I could get into, right? Chicago or Harvard or whatever it is that's appropriate. And you've got those on your list. You've got some reasonable mid-range schools, and you've got your safety school, some sort of a fallback. You know you'll get into that. And so you pick a variety of those things, and then of course you pick programs that look appropriate to you. That's one of the first things I would suggest people do.
For me, the application process, what I think you guys don't understand, ranking is important, but I think fit is more important, or at least maybe not more important, undersold by advice that others will give you / what you guys understand about the process. In part because Dr. Steele mentioned really good advice, your statement of purpose matters more than you think it does. Part of what they're looking for is fit. So in your application process, figuring out fit is not easy. It takes work from you guys. It's a challenge. So you want to come to us and say like, so which 4 schools do I like? It's like, I don't know. What are you interested in? We can't like necessarily tell you. We can tell you some schools, you know, that we have had contact with, or where their specialty is, or right, like you go to Mason for public choice economics or political economy stuff. You know, where are you going to go for? We were going to have, who was going to be here? Johnson.
All right, Dave.
Was going to talk about some, Doug Johnson was going to talk about some schools where you can go for IO. There's some ag econ programs, whatever. So it depends on, like last year I went through with Maddie Reed. She is my first student that we sent off to a behavioral program. She was like, so which schools have we sent people to? And I was like, none. Because we've never had this like branch of anything. So I gave her what I could find, and luckily there's some good stuff out there or whatever, and she dug through stuff, and she's like, so what do you know about this program on consumer behavior in the family at the University of Wisconsin? And I said, I can't believe it's a thing. That's what I know. Like, weird. So sometimes we won't know, but you guys have to try and find out, because for 2 reasons. You need to, on your statement of purpose, show fit, and that's really a big thing that you're trying to figure out in terms of where do you want to go. Bigger, to me, than what I think most other people just say, go to the highest ranked school that you can get into. I try and like hesitate away from that, because the real goal to me is to get the 3 letters after your name, and you don't get the 3 letters, 50% fail out, if you don't love what you're doing. And so you gotta find the fit where you're going to be driven to get through the whole program. So it's a little bit of an undersold but hard thing to do. You gotta go on websites. And my other big advice for finding that fit too is always email the grad school program's secretary. They know everything, and you just ask them stuff. Right? Just find out who the grad school program secretary is and ask them stuff. Be like, so who can I contact about things? Or, you know, who gets in and what field exams are going on? I know your website lists this, but it seems kind of murky and whatever. That's what they do, is they answer this kind of stuff for you guys. And they tell you, oh, this person's really doing this. You get a better feel for what's really going on by talking to those people. So, like I know, if you guys know, Julia's not here. Julia Wacker, I can throw her under the bus right now. She's like emailed all of these like law schools secretaries, and she's like, oh, they told me this and this. And I'm like, oh, didn't know that, right? She's finding out information by emailing them. So fit stuff, and that's the big thing within the application process that's different than.
Actually, one thing to add is that I picked professors when I asked for my letters that had PhDs from the place that I was applying to. So I had, when I was applying to MIT, I had a professor that had gotten their PhD from MIT, so they could write and say, I recommend him, and they know the program. So if you want to go to George Mason, then go to somebody like Dr. Clark, because he can say, I know the program, and he'll know people there. So I think that's, or NYU, or Berkeley, or whatever. If your letter will be nice if I can write, yeah, my PhD's from Berkeley and.
If they know who it's
how it
coming
works.
from, it makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah.
I would just say that this is all really good advice. Something to emphasize maybe is that your statement and your CV will be individual, and your letters individualized for the particular schools that you're applying to. When I applied to 4 schools, but when I wrote to George Mason and NYU, I talked about Austrian economics, but I talked about other things when I applied to University of Washington and Indiana University, which were the 4 I applied to. What are they interested in? What do they do that I'm interested in? So I individualized everything. I recommend that very much.
Great. Well, this will be my last question, and we'll open it up to general questions from the audience. But can you walk us through just an average day in the life of a grad student?
We just cried a lot.
Okay, you're talking about early 1970s in Berkeley. I don't think it's going to be relevant.
We've had these panels the last couple of years, and we've invited people up, and this question is like part of the asked question. And the people are currently in grad school, and what they do is they tell you that the first year is the hardest thing they've ever done in their life. And they say, I think people have actually said this, they say, I stayed up until midnight doing nothing but mathematics and econometrics and running regressions, and I'd go to bed, and I'd wake up at 6 a.m., and while I was asleep, I dreamed about doing regressions and all of this stuff, and I woke up at 6 a.m., and I ate, and then I went and I worked again. The first year is tough. There's no doubt about it, it's hard. I've never met anybody who can keep up that kind of pace where they can work on something super hard until midnight and wake up at 6 a.m. I just haven't seen it. I outwork people, plain and simple, and I can't do that. That's how I've gotten to this point where I got a PhD and all that, because I outworked everybody. That's how I do things, and I can't do that. So if I'm outworking everybody else and I'm not doing that, there's something going on here. The first year is tough, but it's also fun. It's just econ, and you don't have other stuff, and you're only doing like 3 classes at a time. It's tough, and you're working really hard, and you're doing, but it's just econ, and that's all that you have. That like what's going on. People who leave and come back and already have a family, that's part of the reason why they struggle a little bit more of actually getting through the degree. That's kind of a different story, but because to them it's not just econ, it's like life and econ. So it gets a little bit tougher. The first year, though, it is tough, but Wolfram always says, I was in Berkeley, Pungrasic always says, it's the hardest thing in the world, it'll be so tough, you don't understand, but be prepared for the challenge, right? And then Wolfram turns to him and says, you were in a band while you did it. Right? So I've heard that conversation a number of times, so there's context there. It is really tough.
It is hard. The first quarter that I was at Berkeley was very hard. Primarily because when I was there, it was extremely mathematical. I came in moderately prepared, but I took a graduate course in general topology, not having had the undergraduate course of general topology. Well, if you're at Berkeley, who's in that class are people that are getting their PhDs at Berkeley in mathematics. And it was, in fact,
What is it? This guy's up there lecturing and with one hand, writing with one hand and erasing with the other, just going through this stuff so fast. And then somebody raised their hand and they said, is this true in a Hausdorff space? And I turned to the guy next to me and I said, who cares? And he turned around and looked at me like I was crazy, So the first quarter was very hard. But then I figured out, okay, don't take any more don't take any more math in the graduate program. If you're going to take a math class, take the undergraduate math, and you figure it out after a while. So
You'll cry a few times, fine, right? But you also get to work on stuff, and it was like the first year, if I could go back to grad school and do the first year again, I would right now. It's fun. It is. It's like intermediate micro.
That's perverse. Going back to grad school. We did, so at NYU we were told that we should work 60 hours outside of class per week. And I know that that's pretty much what we did. And I think all the people who got through the program did that. That first year was super intense. And it was working because some of us were doing Austrian economics. It was everything under the sun. It was math, econometrics, statistics. And the second year, though, you get into your field classes. You start getting into those. Those are really interesting. Actually, I thought it was all interesting. But the field classes where you picked out specialties and you're studying things, I love that stuff. And it was still extremely intense. Lots and lots of work. You didn't have loads of free time. When we got a little free time, we're like, what are we going to do? We're in New York, but we can't find anything to do because the only thing we know is study. But it was a great way to do things. I will say that the whole experience, you may not believe it, but the idea of getting up and the first thing you do is write down everything you learned the night before. That's how I studied for my game theory field exam. I did game theory, and basically the only thing I did was game theory and run. And my running wasn't too bad, but I would start talking to my friends and they would say, oh, I couldn't walk across the street without talking about it as a game theory problem. And I have to say, it's one of the coolest, in a way, one of the coolest things I've ever done, because I knew that stuff so well when it was done. So it's a lot of work, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah, it does become your life. I'm not saying it's not a lot of work or whatever, but it's not 18 hours a day, nonstop working super, super hard, and oh my gosh, you can't do it. You can do it. You're here at Hillsdale, we challenge you. You could do it.
Great. Well, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them.
So just regarding like, we graduate from Hillsdale and we're applying for a master's, just like to be more competitive for a better PhD program versus applying directly for PhD. How does that really work? Can you talk about
I mean, that is definitely one way to get into a program. When I was at Berkeley, there was 2 or 3 people that came in out of the master's program that could not have gotten in as straight out of undergraduate. So you can, and Professor Steele has strong connections with Montana State, and they do a very good job at placing people from there. So if that's one mechanism to get into a better PhD program if you couldn't get in straight from an undergraduate.
So here's in answer to that. One thing that a number of our students have done. So Kadeem Norin, who was a triple major, math, econ, and physics. Pretty smart guy. Actually, I think he did work 18. He doesn't know that there's anything else to do. That was what he does for fun. But Kadeem applied to a bunch of PhD programs, and then he applied to some master's programs as his backups, so that if he didn't get into the PhD programs he liked, he'd go to a master's. And he had no trouble getting into a good master's. He went and got a master's degree, and then that bounced him to his PhD. And Savannah, his wife, Savannah Norrie, is basically doing the same thing. She actually works for Harvard right now, but is going to be, I think this year, applying to PhD programs. But she got her master's. That's her stepping stone then to get that. So we had Abby Loxton, for example, who was here, was it last year? I think spoke on the panel. And she did the same thing. She applied to some master's programs, but some PhD programs. She got into a PhD program she liked, so don't go to the master's, go straight to the PhD. So that's what I would think you would want to do if this is your goal. Have some of each.
In different master's programs, this is part of the research thing, push you in different directions. So, like George Mason's master's program, I think George Mason's great. I went there, all that stuff. It's not really like a stepping stone school for a PhD program, other than maybe going to Mason. Some people do that. Their master's program is more policy focused, policy driven. In other programs, most programs are kind of generalist, but you kind of got to look into what program you're getting into. Whereas like Montana State's, it's like kind of geared towards that. So you kind of got to look at the master's programs that you want. But there's a lot of people here too. You might want to just get a master's too. Like I think that's an undersold idea. They're starting to pay you to go to master's programs more and more. Just do it. It's like 2 years where you get to ease into being an adult. It's great. So I would, you might want to consider just getting a master's. So.
But if you want to be a professor,
You gotta get
you have to get the PhD. And the PhD does open up other events. In some ways, you probably know I've been in the public policy arena before. And when you're testifying, if you have a PhD, it's sort of like proof by intimidation, and so that will, if you're a lobbying firm, you may want to hire somebody that has a PhD, because that gives you a little cachet. Or people at a lot of the think tanks, you might go to work for a think tank as well. But if you're going to be at a 4-year degree, you could teach at a junior college with a master's. But if you're going to be at a 4-year institution, you're going to need to have a terminal degree, so you'll have to have a PhD.
Are master's degrees also specialized into certain fields of economics in the same way that PhDs are, or are they more general in the same way like when you have a Bachelor of Economics, do you just have Masters of Economics?
They tend to be less specialized, but there are some places that are specialties. So you can find schools that are say focused really on agricultural economics. There are actually things like forestry economics, mining economics, and things like that. Very specialized programs, and some that are also in finance. So a master's in financial economics, things like that. But they tend to be more general.
But those that are specialized, like if you get a master's in ag econ, you're probably going to do that's what you're going to do. You're going to go into agricultural economics.
It's probably not true.
You have the
Not true with
master's.
ag econ. It's probably true with like mining and forestry economics. Probably not true with ag econ, depending on the program. You can go into a different realm of economics.
What are your thoughts on taking like a gap year between undergrad and graduate school?
It was, I did more than a gap year. I think it depends on the person, but for me it was absolutely necessary. I didn't know I wanted to go to grad school. I didn't want to go to grad school at that time. I had a bachelor's in history. I did not want to pursue, I loved it, didn't want to pursue it as a career or as a graduate program. And I had other things in mind. For some people, so we've got Eric Reagan right now is a good example. He spent a year or two outside of working in financial industry and making pretty good money, but he knew he wanted to go to grad school. He's now at Barcelona Graduate School of Economics, getting a master's. He intends to complete that and then again be out for a couple of years and then eventually go back for a PhD when he's good and ready for that. And it's a perfectly sensible strategy for him. It fits his lifestyle. His wife is full-time employed with a big financial firm, and so they can do this. So.
Yeah, it's just going to depend on your particular lifestyle. I knew that I wanted to get my PhD and just go on and do it. So it didn't even occur to me that I would do that. But lots of people will take that year. And if you're talking about an MBA, that's a whole different ball of wax. You have to be out at least 5 years to get into a top MBA program. They expect you to be out in the real world for a while. So any of the top MBA programs, you're gonna go out, get a job first, and then apply for an academic or sort of, I don't know what you call it, but for economics PhD, that's different. You may want to take off. Well, Nikolai Wenzel was a professor here, and he didn't go to graduate school for several years. My wife's sister's husband, which I don't know enough about family relationships to know what to call him, but anyway, he didn't start a PhD program until he was 34. So he had gone out, went in the Navy, went in the Peace Corps, and then went. But he became a professor and stayed a professor until he was 75. So.
Brandon, one of our students, Brandon, did that too.
Is that right?
Michael Brandon.
Pungrasic's not here, but I'm going to give his advice. He has a very strong preference on this. He says take a gap year. So he says you're going to be burnt out. That first year's tough. Go, and his advice is do some like menial job. Like go work at Taco Bell if you have to. Who cares? Just be you. Be in the moment, go get an internship if you want, but whatever it is, if you can, take that gap year and then be recharged and ready to come back in and kick butt. So he generally highly recommends it whenever I've talked to him about it. I am the opposite. So I wanted to at least give his voice of sample size 1. Me, sample size 1, I told you guys I wasn't a very good student until my last couple of years, so I wasn't burnt out. I was ready to go. So it would have been, that's crazy to me, to take a gap year, just go. And also I do think it's, some people I've talked to who have gone to master's programs or whatever, they were a little bit worried about being burnt out, and then they go and they're like, this is different. It's not the same thing, this is different. You're like halfway actual adult now. And you're only doing econ, and it's a new school, and you're around people who care about it too. It's like a different feel. So even if you are kind of burnt out, consider, are you just like burnt out from studying and you just can't do anything anymore? Or are you burnt out from Hillsdale? You're ready to move on. It's not that Hillsdale was bad, but you're ready to move on, right? So I kind of say, don't do the gap year, because I have seen a lot of people say, I'm gonna do a gap year, and then it turns into a gap half decade, and then it turns into a gap decade. And the longer you're out, there's cool stories, you can come back, whatever. The longer you're out, generally speaking, your opportunity cost increases. Your family starts, things like that, or whatever, and then it becomes much more costly to go get your degree, which maybe is the right path for you. Don't get the degree, but if you absolutely want the degree, realize that your cost goes up the longer you're out, because life happens. You get a higher salary, you have wife and kids, or whatever it is, right? And so a lot of the people who struggled in my program were people who weren't fresh out of college, actually. It was the people who were on the fence about it, because man, I could just go and get that nice job where I was running regressions for this consulting firm, and they were paying me $75,000 a year already. What am I doing here? Me, I was like, if I don't do this, I have no idea, right? So I was gonna do this. So 2 different ways of thinking about it. These guys said it depends on who you are. I would echo that, but I'll throw Pungrasic's voice in. I speak for the trees.
All right, well, it's about 8 o'clock, so we're going to officially wrap up, but I'm sure professors are glad to take any questions after classes, shoot an email. But thank you all for coming.
Thanks for coming, guys.